In the early days, when we had the prototype cars available, we did a deal with, or I did a deal with Chausson, who were the radiator suppliers. We chose Chausson simply because they already knew the PRV engine, and they were already providing the radiator for Renault, so they knew the heat rejection that the radiator would give to support the engine. So the agreement we struck with Chausson was that basically, yes, you can do the work, but now you've got to prove that in fact that the radiator works. So we arranged to have 2 days of testing in Paris, and we would use the Chausson wind tunnel, climatic wind tunnel, at no cost to DeLorean, to prove that the system worked. So this is the car that we took over. It wasn't a complete car at that point, as you can see that the panels were only GRP panels. There was no structures to the door or even any interior in the car. It was just GRP panels and representing really the car. It didn't have interiors to the doors. This was in fact a broom handle which kept the door open so that we could get in and out of the car. When we got to France, we found that the car, which was in a trailer attached to the flatbed, on the flatbed was another vehicle, which was a bit strange. But so anyway, we took our car out, ready to go into the wind tunnel, and the car was then prepared. And these are sort of shots inside the wind tunnel itself. But what had happened, or what Lotus had done, is that they had taken one of their cars over as well, so that on the basis that if the DeLorean didn't perform in the tunnel, they would then substitute their car for the DeLorean and get our 2 days of free wind tunnel testing. So this is just the inside of the wind tunnel, and the car being attached. The French mechanics attaching the various bits to the car and such like, the sensors underneath the car to look at the temperature of the water and such like, coming backwards and forwards to the radiators. Inside the wind tunnel, we obviously had the roof lights on to heat the tunnel up, as well as we could chill it all down to whatever the temperatures were to do all of the work. This is the car as it in the back of the car in the tunnel, the exhaust obviously being taken away, and the car was on rollers, so in fact it was driven at varying speeds. The only way you could do this was that the French expected that you had some form of remote control that you would dial into the engine and say, this is the speed that we want. We had a wooden box which we sat on with our foot on the pedal, listening to the control room telling us what speed we had to drive at. And we could not, whatever you do not touch the brakes because you're on a rolling road. This panel here, this deflector at the back, engine cover, was a very late addition, and it was actually first put onto this car. Very simply just laid on, and at the back here was a wing nut which was holding this panel down. And I was in the car and travelling along, as you might say, at about 80 kph or something like that. And I noticed, looking in the mirror, that this panel was starting to vibrate, and the vibrations were getting worse. And I could notice then that, I spotted that the wing nut that was on the back had come undone, and the panel started to fly and went into the wind tunnel, into the fans, and through the bits and pieces up into the roof, which put the roof lights out, sent all the fire alarms off and such like. So we had to shut the whole thing down, and that was the end of testing for that particular session. We didn't do any more. That was the car actually just before it's going into the wind tunnel. This is the car we had in Coventry, which we had it over. It was a sales and marketing car. We had it over for a period of time so we could take it to the suppliers and say, yes, we are actually serious, we're building a car, this is it, so they could get a warm feeling that we were actually building cars. The rest are all A few more shots of the wind tunnel. Make sure, what else have we got? Again, this is the Coventry office. This is all of the people that worked in Coventry. And these are the various people that worked there. There's Nick Sutton, who obviously was the purchasing manager at the time and who's written a book about the exploits of the Coventry offices, you might say. And these are all the people that worked in the Coventry office. I'm in the middle there, a bit younger. What we basically did was that we went all over the country looking after the supply base. We worked obviously with Lotus as the engineers, but to develop the car in such a short space of time, we did something in those days which was completely unheard of, was that we worked with the engineers. They would come up with the particular area that they were working on, and they would say, for instance, that the area that I worked with, which was the chassis, suspension, steering systems and so forth, and that the engineer down there would say, okay, I've got, in one particular instance was the throttle. Being a PRV engine, none of the Renault systems would work in the car in terms of the throttle, because obviously the car was completely different, engine being at the back. So Mike Foxon, who was the engineer, he would lay out the drawings on the table, on the drafting tables, and say, there's a pedal, there's an engine, I want something that will control the throttle from the pedal to the engine. That's it, go do it. And then the same would happen with the speedo drive, the odometer drive. Like the engines at the back, we can't use the takeoff from the gearbox because we've turned the gearbox round and the differential now is blocking the area that would normally take the takeoff for the speedometer. So something was needed, and Mike's view was like, that's your job. So that's what we did. We knew our suppliers, we went round the supply base looking, not only working at what we were doing on a specific problem or whatever, but also keeping an eye open for things that may be useful. And it was, for instance, while I was over in Birmingham, in Girling, looking at the shock absorbers and some of the issues we had with the shock absorbers, that I noticed a little right angle gearbox. I said, what's that? And they said, well, oh, that's actually something that we make very infrequently for the motorcycle industry. It's the drive for the speedometer from the front wheel of a motorbike. That's interesting. Can you make it slightly longer? And because that's what we're looking for the DeLorean. So took a sample, took it down to Lotus, which, as I say, we were going down every week, down to Lotus. Took a sample down and said to Mike Foxon, okay, here's a drive. All we've got to do now is fit it into the suspension system, which was a fairly straightforward system. Hence, that's how we got the angle drive coming through the stub axle through into the back of the speedometer. So that was how we worked. Everything we did was the water system, working with a company again in Birmingham, Prescott Powell, that we said, well, there's the radiator, there's the engine. You know about pipes better than what we do, so you can measure it all up, make the pipes, and we'll fit them. And it came down to the same with the tailpipes on the exhaust systems. We didn't like the way they came out the back, and so it was to Prescott Powell, well, what can you do? And they said, well, we can do this and we can do that and we can turn, and so they did. So everything that we worked with the suppliers was a way of getting the parts that were able to fit very, very quickly. They were already tooled, or very limited tooling that was needed, and they were parts which were available to us. Did the same with suspension systems, where the front wishbones were, in fact, the ball joints on them were Ford. Well, yeah, that's what we want. Can you make those then with a slightly harder specification on the steel? And they said, well, this was Alford and Alder was the supplier. Well, yes, we can do it, but of course it's a Ford part. So we said, well, so what? And they said, well, but it's got a Ford logo on it. Grind it off then. So the parts we had from Alford and Alder were Ford parts, admittedly modified by a new pin and by the Ford logo being taken off. But that's how we got the parts quickly. We got them at a good price, and they did the job. What else have we got in here? And then we start to get into the gold plating. Yeah, that's the gold car, which is obviously a separate story.
They had a Christmas magazine with all gifts, and the center spread of that magazine was a gold-plated DeLorean.
It was $85,000 at the time, which was just a staggering amount. You could put a $10,000 deposit down on it using your gold card.
It's a particular dream of two individuals, so there had to be a draw to the idea of having a car plated in pure gold.
Well, there's a third one, but it's not an official third one. After the company went out of business and they had all the panels here in the States, they decided to make another car. And when they did a count of the panels, they only had 7. So one of the doors was missing, so they had that door replated in the States, and it doesn't match the rest of the car. So when they completed the car, it was not possible really to sell it, and now the car is on the east coast of the US somewhere.
It's something that you won't see anyplace else. Only 3 of the cars, so it's an interesting story. I enjoy the story, the unusual door that stands out when you pull it out in the sun, when anyone sees it. That's always a question. But it's fun, unique, and a conversation piece no matter where it goes.
What's going to happen to it? I'm going to sell it if I can find somebody dumb as I am.